Technology plays a hugely important role in the daily lives of adolescents. 95% of teens have access to a smartphone, and 45% that say that they are online almost constantly, with YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat being the most popular online platforms for adolescents. While most adolescents use social media in a healthy way, a certain small percentage end up with an addiction to social media. Therefore, it's important that clinical psychologists who work with adolescents understand and are able to address this emerging concern. One major issue in the space of social media addiction is a lack of consistent definition and terminology. Social media addiction is often not distinguished from general internet addiction, which includes addictions to other internet applications such as gaming. Additionally, there is no formal diagnostic criteria for psychological assessment of social media addiction. In the absence of a formal diagnostic criteria, a biopsychosocial model of behavioral addiction can be used. Social media addiction can be identified by examining the salience of the behavior, its impact on adolescents' moods, increasing use of social media, withdrawal symptoms when not using social media use creating conflicts in adolescents' lives, and when there are relapses in social media use. There are a significant amount of research evidence from adolescent populations across the world which demonstrate clear relationships between social media addiction and a range of demographic, mental health, personal, and social variables. Demographic factors alone may account for 11 to 12% of variance in social media addiction. Female gender is the strongest demographic variable, with consistent research showing that adolescent girls are more at risk of social media addiction than boys. Lower education and lower income have also been found to be associated with social media addiction in adolescents. There is also very clear evidence of a strong link between social media addiction and a range of mental health concerns. Mental health variables, including ADHD, OCD, anxiety, and depression, account for 15% of variance in addictive use of social media. Adolescents who report problematic levels of social media use have reported high levels of depression, anxiety, emotional distress, and stress. Commonly co-occurring personal factors associated with social media addiction include lower levels of self-esteem, problems with emotional regulation, lower levels of developmental adjustment, and negative childhood experiences. Finally, there are a range of social and interpersonal variables which have been found to be connected to social media addiction, including mattering, school connectedness, loneliness, social exclusion, higher alienation to peers, and challenges with interpersonal competence. Poor family functioning and poor relationships with parents are also important factors associated with social media addiction. The research evidence makes it very clear that there are strong patterns of correlations between social media addiction and a range of psychological, behavioural, and social concerns. However, the majority of studies are cross-sectional and therefore cannot indicate which factors might cause social media addiction and which might be symptoms of it. The few longitudinal studies available show mixed results. One longitudinal study found that social media use did not predict depressive symptoms, but that higher levels of depressive symptoms did predict social media use for adolescent girls. Yet another longitudinal study found that greater interaction on social media at age 10 was associated with worsening socio-emotional difficulties in later adolescence among females. Considering this range of correlating factors, it seems that social media addiction amongst adolescents often occurs among individuals already experiencing some level of adversity, whether it be socioeconomic disadvantage, challenges in familial and interpersonal relationships, mental health and emotional challenges, or a combination of several of these factors. This is shown by the range of studies which demonstrate how these different variables partially mediate and moderate their effects on one another. These complexities combine with the challenges of adolescence when social emotional difficulties and risk-taking behaviour commonly increase. This perspective is supported by experts in the field who believe that social media addiction amongst adolescents is a coping strategy that is used to help manage underlying feelings of stress, mental health concerns, and feelings of low self-esteem. Yet others suggest that the relationship could be bidirectional and more complex than social media use being a coping mechanism. One model which attempts to unpack the complex relationships between a variety of these variables is the interaction of person-effect cognition execution model proposed by Brand et al. This theoretical model helps to explain the underlying process of development and maintenance of addictive use of internet applications, including social media. Brand and colleagues propose that core characteristics such as an individual's genetics and early childhood experiences, underlying mental health concerns, personality factors, and social factors interact with emotional and cognitive responses. These include stress, people's coping strategies, cravings for social media, desire for emotional regulation, attentional biases, and reduced executive functions. Brand proposes that together these interacting factors lead to addictions to specific internet applications. Clinical psychologists have an important role to play in addressing the problem of social media addiction among adolescents. This includes in the assessment, treatment, and research of the issue. Before being able to help a young person experiencing social media addiction, we first have to be able to identify the issue through assessment. Clinical psychologists are perfectly positioned for this, considering that psychological assessment is core to the work of clinical psychologists and is one of the defining aspects of the profession. Through the process of assessing social media addiction in adolescents, clinical psychologists would first focus on clarifying the problem. This means gathering information to understand the symptoms experienced, their duration, severity, and impacts. This would be done by establishing a formal diagnosis. This often would be done by establishing a formal diagnosis, yet as there is no formal diagnosis for social media addiction, this is challenging. The assessment process also focuses on building a comprehensive understanding of the range of factors which influence the onset and maintenance of social media addiction. This could be any number of the correlated variables previously discussed, or others not mentioned in the literature. The purpose here is to understand how and why the problem developed and what is supporting it to continue. Then, clinical psychologists provide a prognosis by outlining expectations about an individual's condition, the likely outcomes if they do not engage in treatment, and potential effectiveness of treatment options. Finally, suggestions about treatment options are given and any issues which would interfere with their effectiveness are identified. Another key role for clinical psychologists is in the provision of therapeutic treatment to support adolescents with social media addictions. Unfortunately, such support efforts are hampered by what seems to be an absence of research on this particular issue. Meta-analysis looking at more general internet addiction among adolescents show that a range of internet interventions from various theoretical backgrounds indicate positive effects on internet addiction. However, there is very limited evidence to indicate that only any one intervention is more effective than another. Cognitive behavioural therapy is one possible evidence-based treatment approach which is endorsed for use with adolescents to address anxiety and depression. However, there is limited evidence on the effectiveness of CBT for internet addictions. In one meta-analysis, CBT interventions saw reductions in internet addiction severity among adolescents, but these were not statistically significant. Furthermore, it is important to consider comorbidities and adapt treatment accordingly. For instance, it has been suggested that cognitive behavioural therapy will not be effective where social media addiction presents with an ADHD diagnosis. In such a situation, it might be best to use behavioural parent training and behavioural contingency management, which has been found to be effective for treating ADHD. One therapeutic model called cognitive behavioural therapy internet addiction has been designed to treat internet addictions using CBT and harm reduction therapy. While potentially promising, this therapeutic approach has not been tested with adolescents or with social media use specifically, so we cannot know of its effectiveness. One treatment factor which emerged in the literature as potentially helpful is use of family-based interventions or interventions which include parents. Considering the links between social media addiction in adolescence and challenges in family life, such treatment approaches are worth studying further. Group interventions have also shown promise, perhaps due to the significance of social connection on social media use. Considering that research shows that the therapeutic approach contribute very little to overall therapeutic outcomes, the particular therapeutic approach may be less important than the therapeutic relationship that is fostered, as this impacts more significantly on treatment outcomes. As has been outlined, there are significant issues and gaps in the theoretical and evidence base of social media addiction in adolescents that clinical psychologists can contribute to filling. We need to clarify the fundamental conceptual frameworks, definitions, and terminology regarding social media addiction to support a unified and cohesive research approach. In all research, it is important that social media addiction is distinguished from general internet addiction or addictions to other forms of interactive media such as gaming, as these are distinct behaviours. To better understand the complex relationship between social media addiction and the range of intersecting risk factors, there is a need for more longitudinal studies which unpack these relationships. Finally, there is a need for improvement in the quality and design of treatment studies, including consistent diagnosis, randomization, and blinding techniques and controls and comparison groups. In summary, a range of factors are correlated to social media addiction. However, due to a lack of longitudinal studies, we know little of their interaction effects. Social media addiction is likely caused by complex intersecting factors, including underlying characteristics and affective and cognitive responses. Clinical psychologists have a role to play in treatment settings through the assessment and treatment of social media addiction among adolescents, and clinical psychologists can also contribute to developing a stronger research and evidence base to support greater understanding and improved treatment.